Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I will be doing swatches, a demo, and a review of the Pat McGrath Divine Rose 1 palette. So that is this beauty over here, and it comes in a gorgeous box as well. Unfortunately, mine is a little bit torn up, but you can see the imagery here. So beautiful. And this is one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes of all time and definitely appeared in my 2020 favorites as well. So if you are interested in learning more about this palette and seeing how I got this look, then just stick around. So to start things off, let's go in with some swatches. So the first shade in the palette is Skin Show Nude, which is described as a champagne platinum. And this is one of my favorite highlight shades for the inner corner, brow bone, cheek, really anywhere. It is just a very perfect, fairly neutral champagne shade that goes well with any look. Next up, we have Valoria, which is described as a taupe rose matte. And I would actually say this to me looks a lot more lavender lilac than rose. In general, this palette pulls much more purpley, in my opinion, than rose. But this is a gorgeous shade that swatches a lot deeper than it does in pan. So in pan or in pictures, you might see this as just a super light shade. But I found that even if you are of my complexion, if you build this shade up, you can definitely get some color payoff. Next, we have Sable Bronze, which is described as a luminous bronzed brown. And I skipped a little space there, but we're just gonna pretend that doesn't exist. But this is a really gorgeous shade that you can use in a bunch of different ways. So you can definitely put this all over the eyes if you want more of a really smoky brown look. But because this is in Pat McGrath's metallic formula, you can also use this in the outer corners of your eyes, along your lower lash line. It has that nice dense pigmentation that still can be blended out and feathered out really nicely. So I really enjoy this shade. Next up, we have Refined Gold 002, and this is described as a gleaming golden platinum. And I really enjoy this shade. For me personally, I am not a huge fan of very yellow golds. So I like that this one has a bit more of that white gold platinum appearance to it. I think it just makes it a little bit more unique. And for me, given my golden yellow undertones in my skin, this is just a little bit more wearable since it creates a nice cool contrast. Next, we have Iridescent Pink 003, and this is described as a opalescent pale rose. So I think this was actually originally released as part of a highlight collection. And this for me is one of the most unique formulas I've seen from Pat McGrath in that it has such a beautiful shine to it, but in a more almost kind of satin finish. So if you say compare Skin Show Nude with Iridescent Pink, you can see the finish is very different. Or even actually you can just compare these two. So this has much more of a metallic finish, whereas this one has a little bit of a softer finish. And so I find that makes this shade excellent for layering. If you put it over any other shade, it'll just kind of turn it into a shade that has a pink shift to it. So I really love this shade and the unique looks that you can get from it. So that's the first row done. Starting with the second row, we have Extreme Mahogany, which is a rich mahogany matte. And wow, that's swatched so beautifully. I love this color. It is really a very interesting mahogany in that it has a little bit of that plummy cool tone to it, but it also has that rich brown redness to it as well. So it is really unique. And I think this can go kind of either more warm or more cool depending on what you pair it with. So I find if I use this shade with Valoria up here, it definitely goes more cool and plummy. Whereas if I pair this shade, say, with a warmer shade in Divine Rose 2, then it'll definitely pull a little bit more brown. Next, we have Lovelace, which is described as a luminous pink bronze. And again, this is a shade that I personally wouldn't really describe very much as pink or rose. It is, to me, definitely much more of a lilac lavender shade. and it has such a beautiful shine to it. So the base definitely has a little bit more of a rosy brown, but the flip is a really bright lilac shade. And this is one of my favorite shades in this whole palette because it adds an amazing shine and dimension to any look that you're doing. Next, we have Rose Dusk, which is described as a mid-tone rose satin shade. And this one is also super gorgeous. Definitely the most rosy shade in the palette. So if you're going to this palette because you love your pinks and roses, this will be your best friend. And this shade is also just very easy to use in a bunch of different ways. Because it is a satin finish, it is really easy to blend out in your crease along your lower lash line, but it also does have enough shine and richness to it that you can easily put it all over the eyes and then say layer iridescent pink, skin show nude, or some of the other shades that I'll go through in a minute, and those will just add a little bit more shine and dimension. So these last two shades are definitely the party shades of the palette. So we have VR Rose Venus, which is this beautiful dual chrome shade that has a flip from pink to gold. And I will say, to be completely honest, this shade is a slight disappointment to me because when you swatch it on your arm or look at it in pan, the flip is very evident and very gorgeous. And this is like one of my favorite dual chrome combinations. But on the lids, especially if you are concentrating it on the center of the lid, it almost always just looks gold, in which case it's not that different from the refined gold shade right above it in the palette. So that's a little bit disappointing, but it still is a beautiful shade. Even if it just looks gold, it's still really gorgeous. So last off, we have Astral Solstice, which was kind of one of my surprise favorite shades in this palette. When I first saw this shade, I thought it just looked really boring, honestly, because if you have a lot of Pat McGrath palettes, you know the 4 at the end that are in her Blitz Astral formula are really the showstoppers of any palette. And for this palette, this one in pan just looks white, completely white, because as you can tell, it is just white glitter. And I originally thought, wow, that is really boring because the other ones I have will have like a pink shift to it or a blue shift or a gold shift. So having one that was just white glitter seemed to me that it would be really uninteresting. But I actually have found this is one of my favorite shades in this palette just because you can really pair it with any look and it is so shiny. Like it's all over the center of my lids today and you can see there's just such a nice disco ball effect to it, and because it's white, it is really bright. And so I actually really love that shade. And so here we go. This is the whole palette swatched, and isn't it so gorgeous? I love how with this palette you can take things either in more of a cool tone purpley direction if you stuck with, say, Velouria and Lovelace, and then with extreme mahogany, but then you could also do something that is much more warm toned and more bronzy yellow if you say with sable bronze, refined gold, and also, like I said, this one looks mostly gold on the lids, so you could take VR Rose Venus and also extreme mahogany, and that would give you much more of a kind of neutral tone bronzy look. And then of course these two shades here can pull things more pink along with this iridescent pink shade, and this one too you can layer on top of any of these shades if you want a little bit more of that pink shimmer. And then anytime you want some party to your look, this is the shadow for you. That will just make any look way more festive and interesting. So I love all of these shadows. That said, I do want to point out for you guys some repeat shades because I know that is a huge issue oftentimes with Pat McGrath palettes. So this Skin Show Nude shade does appear in other palettes. So I think it's actually in Subliminal, and it might also be in the Golden Opulence palette, or at least there's a very similar shade. That said, you know, all of her palettes will have some sort of skin show shade, so they're never going to be that different from each other, and I think having a skin show shade in every palette is super useful. Then also I would say this refined gold shade is also quite similar to the pale gold shade in Subliminal, and then Astral Solstice does appear in Midnight Sun as well, so if you have that palette, do be aware of that. I think it is a little bit worse when she repeats Blitz Astral shades, just because, you know, that's what you're really paying for when you buy these 10 pans. But like I said, I do love the shade, so I don't mind that repeat as much. And then Rose Dusk appears in Sublime. So that to me is a little bit unfortunate because I do think this shade kind of anchors Sublime a lot. So it is a little bit unfortunate that she repeated it here. But if you do collect Pat McGrath palettes, that is unfortunately something you'll have to deal with. But I thought I would point those out to you in case, say, you are eyeing Sublime and really love the pink shade, you can get it here. Or if you really loved Astral Solstice from Midnight Sun, you can get that here too. Or if you just love your very basic champagne shade, this one's got you covered. So with all the swatches out of the way, let's dive straight into how I created this makeup look, which incorporates all of the shades in the palette. To start off today's look, I'm going to go in with my Artist Small brush from Wayne Goss and dip into Valoria, this light lilac lavender shade over here. And as you can probably see already, this doesn't have a ton of pigment, but I think this is really good as an initial shade just to set your primer and also just lay some groundwork so all the other shades blend in very nicely. And this is a very unique shade, I would say, in my collection. It has a really strong cool tone to it, but it is still, I think, ever so slightly deeper on the skin than it is in pan. So if you build it up, you'll still be able to see it, even though in pan, I think it kind of looks like it's just, you know, almost a white shade. Next, to add some depth, I'm gonna go in with my classic crease brush from Sonia G and dip into Extreme Mahogany, just to add a little bit more dimension and smoke to the outer part of the eyelid. Next, with my Chikuhodo GSN 9 brush, I'm gonna go into Rose Dusk and just put that in the inner third of the eye and drag it up and around the crease. And then with the finger, I'm gonna go in with Lovelace and just put that all over the center of the lid. Cleaning off my classic crease, I'm just going to blend this all together. Next, I'm going to add some more shimmer by going into this Astral Solstice shade and just take a little bit of it and scatter it on the center of the eyelid. This will really just add a lot of additional shine to the look. Next, I'll take my Rephr number 3 and go to Refined Gold 002 and put that just in the center of the eyelid, sweeping it up slightly. And then for the lower lash line, I'm gonna start with the shade over here, Sable Bronze, and I'm taking this on an Esom G27 brush and just sweeping this all throughout the lower lash line. Cleaning that off, I'm gonna go in lightly into Extreme Mahogany and just put that on the lower lash line in the outer third. Now taking a Wayne Goss number 5 brush, I'm gonna go into this VR Rose Venus shade and put this all over the inner 2/3 of the lower lash line. And then finish off with just a little bit of Rose Dusk in the center of the lower lash line, just to tie everything together. Now for the brow bone, I'm gonna first go into Iridescent Pink 003 and just sweep this all over the brow bone area. And you see that just leaves a really pretty pink flip. And then I'm actually gonna dip into Skin Show Nude and just add that on top just to add a bit more shine to this look. And similarly put a little bit of Skin Show Nude on the inner third of the eye, just to add a little bit more light back in. So that's the eyeshadow done. So now I'm gonna just go in with my M Cosmetics Illustrative Brush Liner in the shade Brown, and I'll be right back. There we go. So that is the eye look all done. I really love this beautiful, very cohesive, but still kind of interesting look that you can get from using all of these colors in the palette. There's just so many gorgeous textures, and this Astral Solstice shade especially just turns your eyes into an instant disco ball. So I really love the looks that I get out of this palette, and obviously I don't normally use all of the shades on my lids at the same time, but I think think, as you can see from today's look, even though there's a lot of different types of tones in this palette, you can still kind of make them all cohere together to make one really nice look. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm just gonna go off now and finish the rest of my face and be right back with my final thoughts and review about this palette. So now for my final thoughts about this Divine Rose 1 palette. So I really love this palette. I was kind of late to the game on this because I heard everyone describe it as a cool tone palette for people who love cool toned everyday looks. And to be quite frank, that is not me. So I am someone who usually gravitates towards warmer toned looks and more colorful looks. So when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is, a little bit boring. And so it just didn't excite me that much. But the reason I got this palette was I've just been so obsessed with the Divine Rose 2 palette. So from the moment I picked that up, I just couldn't put it down. So then when Pat McGrath was having a big 30% sale, I was on the fence about which mothership I wanted to pick up. And I was looking at all of them and I was just like, man, if only there could be another Divine Rose 2 equivalent palette, one that I would love as much as that. And so even though this one didn't really seem like what would normally be up my alley, I thought, well, I might as well pick it up, and worst comes to worst, maybe it will just complement Divine Rose 2. But I have actually really fallen in love with this palette, and I find that I very often grab for just this palette by itself, not as a complement to Divine Rose 2. And that's because even though this palette was described as just being kind of a boring everyday palette, I think this palette really excels in terms of the types of textures that you can layer on top of each other. So this palette just has so many eyeshadows that you can use in really any context for any look. And what I mean by that is, so Skin Show Nude, for example, is really a shade that you can use with any look. And I love this as a brow bone highlight and an inner corner highlight. It's the perfect champagne shade and texture and the type of melt into your skin glow, but still obviously, kind of a popping highlight. It's that perfect combination. So any look you're doing, you can definitely grab for that. And then I also love how Astral Solstice is just so versatile. It really is a bright glittery white eyeshadow that you can put on top of any eyeshadow look just to give it an extra bit of oomph and texture. So I've really been loving that shade. And then this Iridescent Pink 003 is just such a fascinating shade. It turns anything into a slight dual chrome because it doesn't actually have a lot of shine to it. It definitely has more of a satin finish, but the pink flip it provides is just so strong that it makes any look just look much more interesting. And then of course we have the more lilac-y gold shades in this palette. And even though I am typically not a cool tone lover, I have been really surprised with how much I have loved these shades. So I typically don't gravitate towards cool tones just because my skin tone has such strong yellow golden undertones to it that often cool tones just look a little bit sallow. But I find these lilacs are so gorgeous. They pop a little bit on my skin because they are very different in undertone, but they're still very complementary. And I love how this sort of look is both something that is somewhat subtle and everyday in a way, just because this lilac is a fairly muted shade, but nonetheless, this definitely is way more glamorous than if you're just doing your typical neutral look with some tans and some bronzes and some golds. And in general, I just love how all of these shades really cohere well together. So I find it so easy to use all of the shades whenever I use this palette. I never really need to sort of stretch in order to use all of them. They just work so well together and layer on top of each other so well that you can just create a really nice semi-monochromatic but super multi-dimensional look. So for me, I would highly recommend this palette. I will say the same things other people have said, in that I do agree that if you love cool tones, if you love a little bit more of an everyday palette, then sure, this is great for you if you're starting out with Pat McGrath. But I would say on top of that, and in contrast to what other people have said, this is also an amazing palette if you love really glamorous, shiny, multi-dimensional looks and you love purple, pinks, and gold shades. So I highly recommend this palette and think it is really wonderful. And of course, if you love Divine Rose too, then this is a great pairing with that since they do have a somewhat similar color story. But even if you don't have Divine Rose 2 and you want a really exciting look, this by itself can definitely hold its own. It is not the more subdued sister, so to speak, of Divine Rose 2. It is just a slightly different direction. Let's just say that. So that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed the swatches, demo, and review of this palette. I know Pat McGrath palettes are all quite expensive, and so it's a difficult decision to make in terms of which one to pick up, especially if you're a first-time buyer. But I would definitely say that this is an awesome palette, and if you like this kind of look like I created today, then this will be perfect for you. And I do think also this can actually work on a wider variety of skin tones than it might look in pan. I know it looks very light in pan, but it actually has a surprising amount of dimension and depth. So if you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I am a new YouTuber, so I would greatly appreciate the support. And if you have picked up some Pat McGrath palettes and have some favorites, definitely let me know down below. I am constantly expanding my collection, and I'm already debating about which palette I want to get next. So thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!